Welcome to the Music Wide Open podcast
The place for an honest and thought-provoking conversation
about music,
business,
life,
technology,
and the future,
for curious music enthusiasts.
and musicians seeking personal growth. I'm Ingolf Wunder.
And I am Paulina Wunder. You know, I have never met a person who would say that he has bad taste in music. Every time someone starts talking about music, I feel he's convinced that he listens to good music and he knows what's good. And obviously, it's not always the case. It can't be. What is good music?
You're right. Everybody thinks they know, because otherwise they wouldn't listen to it, right? It responds sort of to their current state of mind, so that's why they like it, and people think that, of course, it's gotta be good what I like, right? But few can actually clearly define what's good music, because it's really tricky.
So what's good music?
You're very persevering. A few years ago, I had a TEDx talk about basically what's going wrong in classical music and how we get out of it. And there...
I'm pretty sure many people didn't like it.
That's another story. But some point being made there was that there are sort of two layers, the objective and subjective one, which is the beauty in music, because everybody will hear music slightly different, which is nice. But we cannot forget that there is an objective layer, and there is a code of music in some sense, even if it's so intricate that our limited brains cannot yet get it exactly. Such code is made out of harmonic progressions, melodic ones, combinations thereof, and of course everything can be measured in a way in terms of timing, volume, and timbre. This is basically the three constants where it can be measured. There are many more subcategories, let's say, but this is the main ones. And there are of course human sides to it, such as how often something repeats, how complicated something is, how easy something is, and there are also that's why it's very difficult to define, because you have, let's take for example one of these aspects, like repeats, right? You have repeats in some popular music, not all, by the way. There's great popular music as well, so I want to stress that. But in some, it's really stupid repeats. It repeats all over again, and you are already, after the second time, you have enough of it. And then you have minimal music, sort of, where repeats are so masterfully done that the organism doesn't get bored of them. But whenever this repeat comes, it emphasizes even more the feeling that was supposed to be created within the listener. So how is that possible? Like, you have repeats and...
Of course, not all minimalistic music has it.
Not all, yeah, absolutely not. But therefore I say there's a code that is probably at the moment too intricate to really understand for us, which is good, because if people would understand it fully, then they would misuse it, as always. But there are certain objective things that you can measure. That's my point. So music has to be complicated enough for the organism to be still interested in it. It has to be surprising enough, because human organisms like surprises. If everything is to predict, then you lose interest. And then, of course, it depends on your nervous system and on your brain, and on the sensors that you have, how much you actually hear and how much your sensors take in. So sometimes when people, like in food, if you eat constantly only bad food, you will then get the most wonderful food on your plate, and you will not even recognize that it's so wonderful, because you're used to really bad stuff. So, and it doesn't mean that your senses are then lost forever. Of course, they can be detoxed and grow again, so that you can spot these. But yeah, so there are objective factors that make good music, but there's also subjective ones. and therefore people think that the subjective ones are much more important than the objective ones, which is not true.
Well, yes, some people will say, okay, I like this music, so it's good. It makes me happy, I enjoy it, I feel energized. And then it doesn't matter whether the compository structure has some better quality or not. It's taste that matters. There are people who would say exactly the same about consuming fast food from a popular chain. I like it, it makes me happy, I enjoy it. But it doesn't make the fast food automatically good. So this is this subjectivity.
Absolutely. And, at the end, there are no rules in life generally. So you have people who, I'm going to longevity now, if people, eat bad all their lives, and some make it to 100, and some people eat the most healthy foods ever and are dying when they are 40. So there is no rules in that sense. But of course, if you analyze again, if you're more sophisticated in that matter, which I'm not, but some people are, so I trust them, then it's there are of course many factors that, for example, make up taste, right? I mean, you form your taste in your formative years. You have thoughts and memories and things that you connect to music, so therefore music gets better for you in a certain context, but next to all these subjective things, which cannot be dismissed, of course. If somebody likes a certain kind of music, he's very welcome to listen to it, because it's a free world and everywhere. But of course, like in food, there is a sort of more sophisticated layer to it. Then put it again to food. If the same organisms would one eat very badly, bad food let's call it, and one very good food, then that one with good food will probably live longer, very much probably. Just such a thing you can never really do, because you would have to really Siamese twins. I don't know if there's such a study. I haven't heard of one.
But there are in epigenetic studies, if you have two dramatically different lifestyles of twins, then it influences their life.
Yeah, so and in other words, it's like despite the subjective things, okay, I like it, my organism will make the bad food good for me.
Well, again, with music as well, these are frequencies, so it influences us
yes,
in that
it does,
sense.
and that's therefore listening to more qualitative music is better for the body and better for a person. But sometimes people are just simply not exposed to that. Because if they would be at some point in their life, they might change their taste.
Well, another thing is as well who decides what's good and what's not. So then there are people who think they listen to good music because they trust someone else or some entities, let's say companies or institutions, etc., that say, hey, that's good, listen to it. Or they say, hey, that's bad, don't listen to it. And these people, so the listeners, some of them, honestly and without giving it much thought, believe that that's what's good because someone who supposedly knows more than they do says it's good or bad, although it's not always the case.
That's right. This is like outsourcing your own brain in some way.
Well, some people just cannot really, or they just really honestly trust.
I know, and by the way, this is good as well, because you need to have a starting point and you need to trust historic opinions, because also this, what I said about quality layer of music, this is based on historic facts, like the most talented people in history have talked about quality in music and why this is better, why this is not, and the kind of sum total of these most talented people in the world make this kind of knowledge base, right? So historic opinions are very important. But in these days, we live in times where just everybody can have an opinion, and most opinions are let's say influenced by economic factors, by companies, by other things. So it's very difficult these days to really have a
and lack of self-awareness as well. Exactly. I would say. I will challenge the whole system now. I do that on purpose. Let's take such a situation. Of course, it's an extreme situation, but there are cases of people who exist in the classical music space, because we focus here on the classical music in general. That's why let's talk about it. I hope, and I think, and I hope that these cases are rare, but still. So there are cases of people who, on the one hand, listen to classical music and have some knowledge and some kind of understanding that allow them to speak about classical music, not only privately, but in public. I have to stress that, in public. And on the other hand, they as well listen to some totally different music types. The types that one could say lie on the opposite music spectrum, like heavy metal, for example. This kind of extreme dualities are, for me, frankly speaking, quite difficult to comprehend, but they do exist. And they are difficult for me to understand because we have the whole complexity of the classical music subtleties in the compositions, putting aside the interpretations, because that's another story. And then we have these loud, distorted, heavily amplified sounds. One could say a different kind of sensitivity is needed in order to listen to it or consider it good music. And when I stumble across someone like that, and it happened a couple of times, I'm quite perplexed. Yes, someone will say you can enjoy both gourmet food and also fast food, fries, burgers once in a while. And
outlet.
No, yeah, okay, and that's correct. But I doubt, let's make another food comparison. I doubt that someone who is a connoisseur and writes restaurant reviews and decides about Michelin stars, who is very picky and critical, will openly appreciate something that is, how to put it, not refined. I apologize in case someone feels offended now, but it simply doesn't make sense to me. How do you see it?
I'm personally not a fan of heavy metal, although I don't even, as I said, I know too little to say that there is no example of heavy metal music that is not maybe good in some way. So I would stress that. I'm appalled by 90% of what I've heard so far. Therefore, I say that like this because in some rare instance, maybe in fast food, some particular thing of a fast food menu is maybe amazing. And even if you would taste it, you think like, wow, that's so good because. But this is such a rare example, probably, because most of the time if a gourmet Michelin star chef makes fries, then they're completely different than fries that you get at Burger King.
First of all, you don't have heartburn.
So this is pretty similar for me when it comes to heavy metal. But as I said, there might be a rare instance where really somebody...
But we're talking here about opinion makers in classical music, and sometimes these people decide about some events in musicians' life because of their opinions.
I mean, this is for me even more strange because because you know me, I have very strong opinions, but I like to always, try to go into the other's perspective in order to see if there's something I've missed, because there's for sure many things I miss in life yet, and I will then realize.
Okay, I will simplify it to make it clear for everybody. Let's put it this way. You can't complain about, let's say, the harshness of a violinist or a pianist's tone, and then be content with harshness of loud, crude sounds. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, absolutely. And
because then you're sensitive, or you're
where I wanted to
or you're
go,
selective.
Exactly, absolutely agree. But where I wanted to go with when I said the other perspective is that, and why because of this other perspective that I will now say, I don't understand it even more. Why? Because if you would be so open-minded that you say, I like heavy metal music because it's a completely different art form, and it has, it does this and this and this for me, and it does this and this historically, that's why it's great, and so on. Then if you would go into classical music reviews or judge it, you would have to be even more from the bird's eye view. So it means you would have to care even more that people play very much different, that people have an absolute different take on classical music. But usually, I don't know whom you're talking about, but usually I would presume that then the mainstream things in classical music are reviewed in a certain way, and they are just signed off, and that's it. And there's no real opinion there except, to outrage or to make a headline or whatever. But it's not like, my point being that if you're so from the bird's eye view that you're saying, okay, I see this is a completely different art form, and I look now at classical pianists, for example, and see how this one is taking on Beethoven and how this one is taking on Chopin in a completely different way, like Schnabel did Beethoven, or like Hoffmann played Beethoven, completely different than Backhaus, than Kempf, and they had completely different take on the essence of music, and that's just not our time anymore. So if such a critic would then say, I don't like, standardized playing or whatever. I really like, personality.
Well, such people, they have opinions. They have quite critical opinions. That's the point, exactly. That they can be quite harsh towards classical musicians, and then take it lightly if it comes to something that's much more simple in terms of the construction. I'm talking here about other.
No, I understand that, but here one has to, as I said, I always go from the other perspective. One would have to really review how the criticism in classical music is then done. Like, is there a why, a real why? Is there a analysis of why something is good and bad? If there is, then okay, somebody maybe has just an outlet or a fetish or whatever, and that's then okay. I mean, everybody has sort of two sides to himself, right, in some way.
Yeah, but not public ones. Yeah.
Usually not.
I'm not sure. I still have a problem here.
This is just for the sake of the discussion, because I generally agree with you, because if you have a certain sensitivity in your brain or in your nervous system, then it's just simply, it doesn't go together.
Of course, I want to underline that I brought that as an extreme example, because there are such people in the classical music circle that create opinions as well of other people. And sometimes one could question if it's okay that they even do that. What's their credibility if they listen to something so extreme? I don't necessarily talk here about performing musicians, because it's a well-known fact that classical musicians don't even know the names of musicians who represent other genres. So they have no clue. But I'm talking about
most of them, yes.
Most of them. But that's even, that's a common joke even, because musicians have that sense of humor. They can laugh about themselves. Which is funny as well, because sometimes it brings funny situations.
But this whole thing triggers something very important, and I think we live in times where it's very important actually to talk about what is good music. What is it made out of? Because not only because of the whole AI threat that is coming, or is already here, but generally because we live really in very shallow times in many fields, where not only people get opinions, or I'm talking about influencers or whoever.
It's easy to have an opinion,
but it's easy to get the public nowadays.
Yes.
And then you can say anything unsubstantiated, and people will believe you because you have a following, and this is a danger. Therefore, it has never been like that in known history. And therefore I think it's important to really be critical as to whenever you read something about music, opinions or whatever, that one really gets sensitive as to what's the argumentation that person makes. May it be in a public social media post or in a review or whatever, so that one really thinks, does it have some substance? Does he?
Yeah, exactly. I think the main question here, and that I would like to, from this extreme example, I would like to go back to just a normal question. Who decides? Who decides what's good and what's not? Because I feel that these are often the people who either aren't musicians themselves or who studied music in any broad sense, but didn't prove anything on stage. In other words, at no point in their life did they have a real career as a musician. Maybe a couple of concerts here and there, yes, but not more than that. And now, and it happens often, they are big, fat, opinionated critics who say what's good and what's not. Often without even, I would say, some basic humility. I don't say everyone is like that.
It's not only music, by the way.
But no, of course, yeah, that's true. I don't say everyone is like that, but I would say majority, yes.
Yeah, and that's why I said it's about how one actually one has to in the public discourse. In my opinion, it's not done at all, but it should be explained why something is good, why something is bad. Like, I mean, we have so much historical. We live in times anyway where all the knowledge lies there in front of us just to take, and nobody takes it really. We have so much historical knowledge of structure, craft, whatever, form, counterpoint, modulation, interpretation, all these.
But there are a lot of people who talk about that. So one voice says this, one voice says that.
Yes, but
this
is the empty phrasing that was also mentioned already in the TEDx talk a couple of years ago.
And in this podcast as well.
Yeah, the empty phrasing that people misuse the ability of name drop and remember the right terms, but actually lost the substance, what that term actually really is. So if one would nail such a person down as to, okay, this 5 seconds in, bar number whatever, 5, what is it? Why there and not here? And so usually then there's nothing, because you never get even with such a person to such a point.
We as well mentioned that in another episode.
Yeah, I know, but this is very important, because this is actually where the music is, in the frequency. Like, it's not in the score necessarily, so there will be always some some different opinions in some way. That's a subjective layer, but there is a big fat objective layer that should be the only one that is really talked about in reviews or something. A good critic should say this and this and this and this is bad because that's good because, but overall I just personally don't like it because it's just not my thing, and that's okay, because everybody can have his own taste and opinion.
Of course, but it has to be...
but it has to be substantiated.
Yes. What I see is that many people in the classical music circle, can be anybody, musicians, so-called experts or educators, if one shows them a piece of music they haven't heard, or they don't know who composed it, if it's a new piece, or they don't know who plays it, they very often can't say right away, yes, I like it, what is it? Or, no, I don't like it, what the hell is that? No, they have to think what they think, and I find it quite crazy.
Well,
it feels to me...
Like politicians.
Yes, like they are not sure what to say. It feels to me, actually, they either don't trust their musical intuition, or they over-intellectualize music.
Yes.
But as soon as they have more non-musical data, they are willing to give their opinion quickly. The same thing with recordings, with more known pieces, let's say. There are opinion makers who share their opinions with public, who will like or dislike a performance depending on who is performing. So let's say you show them the same recording and say, that's artist ABC, and they will like it because they like the ABC artist. But for whatever reasons, because maybe of his legend or whatever else. But if you say that's artist DEF, someone who they don't respect as much, they will not be so positive, although it's the very same recording or performance.
That's absolutely true, but I think this is that's why I said like a politician, because I think it's fear of making it in your own life, of, excuse my French, pissing somebody off if you say the wrong thing, because that person has a different, like, you never know the subjective opinion of somebody else who might decide something in your life. Therefore, you rather want to say the same thing they might feel. Yeah,
that's the problem.
These that decide, because you never know, right? If you say something publicly, anybody could read it and anybody could have a different opinion, because there's not enough talk about what is good music in the first place, what makes it good.
Because everybody's content with
yes, and the more fine-grained it gets, like if we go into the interpretation layer, which is extremely important in music, then it gets even finer. So you have even finer receptors and more historical knowledge in order to really be able to say, oh, that's good because, or that's bad because this isn't there, or this should be there because that happened here, so therefore this must happen here, otherwise it wouldn't be good. So this kind of, it takes a lot of bird's eye view knowledge and also guts to actually stick to your opinion.
I would say this, what I mentioned, just simply musical intuition. Look, sometimes public or music listeners, passionate music listeners, have a better musical understanding and feeling what's good and what's not. They don't over-intellectualize. This is what, sorry that I interrupt, what happens, I feel, in pop, for example. I have an impression that people are more genuine and spontaneous when it comes to their opinions. They hear something and instantly feel and say, cool or not cool.
Yeah, that's sure.
And here in the classical music sector, we are people, musicians, like, I have to think. Yeah. What's that? I mean, then I like it. I dislike it. I'm not so sure.
That has to do with these objective, subjective layers, because, as I said, I think much of this phenomenon is based on the fact that you never know what another person's subjective layer will say about that music, and you don't want to make a bad impression on somebody that you might need in the future.
Well, then, yes.
But the objective layer is not really talked about enough. In pop, the same. There are many people who criticize very much how pop goes in the objective composition layer and also interpretation layer and everything, that many things get flattened so much that there's not enough.
Collectively speaking, maybe yes, but I'm talking about, you hear something, oh, that's cool.
Exactly.
That's nice, I like it.
I know, but I think these are slightly two different things that are very well connected. Like, this is what I mean by objective and subjective. Because if you really like something, and if you don't really care about music, or if you don't really care about whether this is good or not, you just like it, it's mainly the subjective layer. It might be that the nervous system and your senses are still so fresh, and your gut feeling is so good that you might pick something that is really honestly spontaneous, original and cool, and also those people who really think about it a long time would agree with you that what you like is also actually objectively good, right? But it might be also that it's not, but you still like it, and then therefore we go into the subjective thing. But I think that would be solved if in the public discussion there would be more of the separation of what is really good because we can actually prove it and we know it, and what is just because I really like it, because there might be some definitely geolocation differences, that people from India like different music, people from Asia like different music, people from Europe like different music. Even within Europe you will have
and different styles of interpretation as well, I would say.
Yes, and therefore it's such a complex subject. Probably that's why it's not really tackled, but we need to, because there are many people who actually talk about music, as you said, as if there would be an obvious rule book as to what is good music.
Yeah, well, there are some rules, but
Absolutely.
These rules are understood in a couple of ways.
That's what I say.
By
there is
groups of people.
There is a subjective layer, but these people that you also referred to talk about as it would be the clearest thing in the world why something is good or something is bad, and they don't explain why. So therefore you don't really know. So they play on that that people don't go into detail in that subject, and therefore they can play the empty phrases very well. That's why they can say whatever they want, and it can be in just to make a headline, to make something.
Yeah. Well, this way, of course, they can hide their lack of understanding or knowledge or lack of humility, I would say.
And build up their own name, because the longer they are not challenged,
yes,
the bigger the name gets, and all of a sudden, after a decade or 2 decades, all of a sudden nobody really notices anymore that you don't know anything.
Yeah. Of course, because you have that's name.
I wrote 200 reviews, right? I must know.
But there are some people, I don't want to be so mean to everyone, because there are some people who really know and really feel and really understand and really hear.
And by the way, that was always like that, because also in the historic writings or oral communication, we heard about instances where there are critics who really know what is good music, and some who really don't, and had also a big voice in the past. So there's always good examples, as I said many times in this podcast. There's always good examples, but overall we see that not only in music, we see that in architecture, in film, in literature. The general tendency is that things go more shallow, and people talk a lot about things that they don't really understand.
Yes, a lot of people talk much more than they know.
Yes, and this will get worse and worse with AI.
That's true.
And very quickly.
That's true, and this is, of course, another subject. I don't know, probably some people think that we are completely paranoid, but we are not. Just there are so many signs, if one really wants to look and analyze what's happening, and goes deeper in the subject of technology and artificial intelligence. This is a potential threat for music, for musicians.
But as we said before...
for quality.
Yes, but not only music, by the way, but as we said before, we are positive, because that's actually the opportunity for humanity to ask important questions. And what is good music is a very important question, because as soon as AI takes over a lot of the tasks that humans did in the past, we ought to know what's good music. If we don't, then somebody else will make the decision.
Exactly. I think it's even more important that classical music enthusiasts, but also I think musicians, are, again this word, I apologize, are getting more and more aware of what they trust, why they trust, whom they trust, why should or shouldn't they trust something.
Yeah, and look inwards, because we cannot also forget that we are very suggestible beings, meaning that if we do not become aware of why we have certain opinions, we are very easy targets for algorithmic recommendation engines, which already, by the way, work on our taste day by day by day, those that use these things. Because the more you are bombarded with a certain thing that you liked once or watched once, and the more
or if your friends or people,
yes, then you just get the things, and most of the people just want to have a good time, so they just listen to whatever basically is served to them, and very few question, and then you just like more and more the thing that you listen to, and then your opinion gets more and more changed by actually outer sources. While if you are aware that this is happening, and if you question why you like certain things, and give it just for the sake of trying a shot to listen to something else, listen to this, listen to that, and see, and actually check how your systems, your
sensitivity
reacts to that, then you see, even if you don't like it, okay, then you go back to whatever you listened before, but you see how other things influence you, and that keeps it fresh. It's like if you have all the time only one type of thing, and you don't even know that something else exists, then...
Well, even if you know, but you don't want to try anything else.
Yeah, then you will never know. Like it's like if you don't try certain foods, to come back to this, you will never know how this tastes. So it will be non-existent for you.
Yeah, but also what's important, this is what I do, for example, if I don't like something, if it's foods or whatever else, if I don't like something, I ask myself often a question, why don't I like it? It's sort of, it's a good brain training.
Yeah.
It's a very good exercise. Because sometimes I come to a conclusion like, wait a second, actually it's not so bad, actually I don't have a reason. And I find another reason for the fact that I don't like it.
Yeah, that's good. You can just challenge oneself. Yes. I think to advise the core ingredients of good music, as far as I could make it out so far, that's also subject to change because I'm learning every day, is definitely the structural logic, harmonic language, the developments, and how that combines the what I call emotional depth or expression and the originality, how crisp it is, how new it is, how cool it is in some sense. And is it timeless enough? Like with the examples that have proven to be timeless, does it have similar substances? And it's really about listening deeply. I think many people listen to music passively, but this is what I meant by going inward as well, to really feel it with all the senses one has, and to pay attention to such small things like if there are repeats, is it losing the meaning when repeats happen, or is it actually amplifying it? Or alone ask oneself, is this music shallow? Like alone this, and then
not
give
only
yourself,
music,
as you
but
say,
even interpretation.
Yeah, anything. Yes, that's what I mean. Composition and the interpretation layer. And then, as you said, ask yourself the question: why is it not shallow, or why is it shallow? What you think are the ingredients that make it deep or not?
Of course, there will be some people arguing in the classical music field that this or that performer or interpretation got so much popularity, so much publicity, so many people listening or buying this or that CD or whatever else, or have bought that it must be good because so many people cannot be wrong. And this is not an argument really that I would
absolutely.
say,
Many people can be wrong.
Because, this wave, and I heard this kind of talks, so first of all, fast food chains will be much more popular always than any 3-star restaurant. But not only this, but what people usually don't know, why certain things sell a lot and why they are becoming popular in the classical music field, is because this or that artist, performer, has a very strong market behind him. There is a saying, follow the money. And it's also true here in the classical music business, because classical music is not equally popular nowadays all over the world. And there are certain regions and certain markets that are much stronger. Therefore, the popularity goes exactly there, and the fame of musicians and the money that can be generated from the artists that are coming from these markets as well.
Yeah. And one more, if I may interrupt you, one more thing that triggered earlier when you said so many people cannot be wrong, right? Well, they absolutely can be, because we both recently watched a speech of Geoffrey Hinton at the Nobel Prize.
Last year that was,
yes.
I suppose.
And he mentioned his family's background in science, and said as well that I think his father was involved in the studies, or at least he was a geologist, I think, and he was saying in the 50s already that there is continental drift, where the science of the time said there is not. So, and everybody agreed, sort of, and he said no, there is, and he was right. So it means he mentioned that as a point that everybody can be in agreement of something and they can't be wrong. So we'll only know later, right?
Yes.
So that's to give courage to those that actually want to dive deeper and want to listen deeper to music and educate themselves in that sense, like being aware of things, right? And then forming their own opinion and having a different opinion than the majority. The majority doesn't have to be right.
No. And what's even more important, and I say that to everyone, including us, to have humility.
Yes. because you can also be wrong, and we can also be wrong about things, and we I know that because I know you for longer now. When we get new facts, we have no problem changing the opinion in that sense publicly as well. That one says, yeah, I didn't know that before, I was wrong, and now I know, and now I believe this because. And again, we come back to this
you need
substantive
to question. One needs to
discussion.
question.
But also the because is important,
Yes.
because that's one has to
Yeah.
say why
Yeah.
one thinks this, and it's, this way one gets credibility, I believe, or at least the people I listen to and look up to do this.
What's the final thought?
Well, first of all, I want to know your final thought as well. From my point, I think it's just what I
I'm
mentioned.
asking questions.
but I think I mentioned that already several times, and this is true. And I want a substantive discussion. I would love to have in the music space people talk more about why something is good and why something is bad, and actually really go into detail.
Yes.
Because that would be nice for young musicians that sacrifice or this is the negative connotation, or give their lives to music and really do it with so much passion and care about every little detail, and then they are thrown into a world where basically people don't tell them why they don't win that competition, or there is not even a substantive discussion why something is good or not, and in the business too.
It's not even about competitions only, it's about life in general, because then 40 years fast forward and one has artists that are still questioning and sometimes depressed because they still don't understand why something went this or the other way in their life, and why certain people rule or run the show.
Yeah.
I wish there's more space for passionate discussions without anger, without complex, about opinions, about quality, and about the future.